Wonderful. Welcome everyone to Inspire's Open Training Unit on resistance, backlash, and anti-gender campaigns. My name is Malia Okino, and I am a diversity and inclusion consultant and facilitator in the area of anti-discrimination in academia. And together with my colleague Lou Beisner-Pedersen, also here with us today, we are part of the University of Southern Denmark's Gender Equality team, and we lead Work Package 6 in Inspire on scalable training. And with us today, we're very excited to welcome Lise Rolandsen Augustin and Andreas Beyer Gregersen from Aalborg University here in Denmark, and the Fierce Project, and Roberto Culpa and Marianne Blidon from the Resist Project, and a very warm welcome to all of you. We'll introduce you all in more detail in a bit, but first I wanted to share a bit about what brings us here today. And so today we're here to speak about resistance and backlash and anti-gender campaigns in feminist work and organizing. Many of us working with diversity, equity, and inclusion work are very familiar with this topic as we face both overt and direct oppression, opposition, and more subtle forms of reluctance and inaction to the work that we do on and off campus. Resistance and backlash are something that we navigate both professionally and also personally, both in terms of consequences of resistance and backlash, which might be in the forms of budget and resource cuts, policy bans, and deprioritization at national or organizational levels, and more individual consequences such as burnout. And this is why we at Inspire found it really important to address resistance, backlash, and anti-gender campaigns in our Open Training Unit series. And we believe that learning how to stay with the trouble, if you will, of these movements is crucial for sustaining and deepening change, and in general, for collective feminist survival. So we think it's really important to talk about resistance, backlash, and anti-gender campaigns, and also really understand more about how they manifest, what kinds of developments and consequences there have been in recent years, and to talk about feminist resistance, collaboration, and intersectional strategies to combat anti-gender politics. So today we've invited 4 brilliant researchers from 2 of the most cutting-edge contemporary feminist Horizon Europe projects, Fierce and Resist, which both work to understand, address, and collectively strategize against resistance and backlash and anti-gender campaigns from intersectional feminist perspectives in both their own ways. So before we hear about the amazing work that you 4 are doing in your respective projects, I want to first go over what viewers can expect from this Open Training Unit today. And so in a moment, we will start with giving our speakers about 15 minutes each to briefly present their projects and the important research and outputs that they've been working on. And then after each project has presented, we'll open up for a facilitated discussion moderated by Lou and myself, where our 4 guests will discuss in more detail topics touched upon in the presentations. So if it's okay, let's just jump into the presentations. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first amazing speakers today from the Fierce Project, Lise Rolandsen Augustin, who is Associate Professor at the Department of Politics and Society at Aalborg University in Denmark, and Andreas Beyer Gregersen, who's postdoc also at the Department of Politics and Society at Aalborg University. And you have both been key members of the Fierce Project, which has been working to revitalize alliances between the feminist movement, civil society, and political decision makers, and your project has aimed to develop in-depth understandings of feminist and anti-feminist or anti-gender movements, activities, and discourses. And you've looked at their impact on the institutional arena and policy outcomes within 5 really important areas: within LGBTQIA rights, within migration, health and reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and the labor market. So your project is really an important interdisciplinary intervention in the field, working across all these different areas and arenas, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about it. So again, a very warm welcome to the both of you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and thank you, Molly and Lou, for inviting us to participate in this Inspire Open Training Unit. We're very happy to be here and to be able to share the project, some of the results from the project, and the way in which we are working in the FIERS project. FIERS it's actually stands for Feminist Movements Revitalizing Democracy in Europe, and we've been working on the project since 2022, and are finishing this year. Actually, it's our last day of the project today, so it's very convenient. Yeah, we want to go through some of the core elements of the project. Yeah, so the point of departure of the project, or the kind of let's say analysis that we did to start working on this is yeah, making this kind of a diagnosis of what is the landscape like, what does society and politics look like, what do we see, what kind of tendencies and dynamics do we find. We see these growing social inequalities, we see increased disaffection with politics or institutional politics, and we also have seen for some years now the strengthening of the populist radical right, and with that, as you mentioned also, Molly, these dynamics and tendencies of anti-gender discourses on the rise, anti-gender actors strengthening, etc. So within that sort of context, our idea, or the idea of the project, is that there is a need for digging deeper into what is it that feminists are doing, what is it that anti-feminist and anti-gender movements are doing, what kind of discourses do we see, what kind of demands do they have, which alliances do they build, and what is their actual impact on institutional politics and on policy outcomes. So this is what we set out to do, and we cover this period from 2010 to 2023. So the approach that we have is that we want to try to combine, or we have been trying to combine, academic knowledge on these issues with the more theoretical perspectives, combining that with the practical knowledge that we find in civil society, bottom-up strategies for how to deepen democracy, how to revitalize alliances also between the different actors that we find. So looking at how feminist movements, civil society, and political decision makers interact with each other, what are the potentials for revitalizing the alliances between them, and how can we also see tendencies, or also contribute to strengthening tendencies for more inclusive ideas of what democracy is and what democracy could look like in the future. So we try to combine these three elements in the approach to this topic. The aims of the project, again, briefly. So we set out to map, first of all, these feminist and anti-feminist movements, which movements are out there, how do they frame gender issues, and what are their demands and the possibilities that they have had for making influence or influencing policies. So that was sort of a first mapping, and then we did of course also analysis of these frames and processes. With that analysis, we also had, or have had, this aim of trying to understand better what kind of contributions do the feminist movements make to what we can label as intersectional democratic innovation. We'll get back to what we mean by that, but this was like what we set out to do. And through that, as I just mentioned, try to develop ways to engender democracy. So focusing on participatory practices, co-creation processes, and intersectional alliances. And again, thinking of this as this interaction between the academic knowledge, the bottom-up strategies coming from the movements, and policymakers and policymaking processes. So we set up a a methodological framework to do this. So we have made a comparative analysis of the main gender debates and actors and policy processes in each of the FIERS countries. So we cover Italy, Greece, Turkey, Spain, Slovenia, Poland, France, and Denmark. So we made analysis of social movement documents and parliamentary debates in all of these national contexts and conducted critical frame analysis on the basis of these documents. We also did discourse network analysis by analyzing media and public debates in the different countries. We made interviews with both anti-gender actors from movements and politicians, and the same for feminist movements and feminist actors in politics. So that was also part of our core empirical data. Then we had these co-creation labs, national labs in each country, where we set up networks, and we also had fierce actions, and we'll explain again in a bit what that means. But it was part of our empirical data as well, so we also analyzed the processes of these labs and actions. And we did it within the fields that you mentioned already, Molly: labor market, health and reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, migration, and gender-based violence. So these were the themes that we covered. We tried to cut across them as well. And we also added a transnational dimension to this. So we also have analysis of the EU level, both in terms of the critical frame analysis and also the labs that we established. We had a transnational lab as well. And then I think we can present a little bit of our findings.
Yes,
Andreas?
very briefly, at least, yeah, based on our empirical results from these different kinds of streams in the project, both the interviews, the analysis of the campaign documents, the discourse network analysis. We've uncovered across all the 8 country cases an ongoing strength of this gender ideology, critique or narrative, and also an articulation of common frames across countries, which points to a clear form of transnationalization of the anti-gender movement across Europe. One of these common frames focus, for instance, on rights and freedoms connected to, for instance, the freedom of speech, which then helps to promote this narrative again of there being a gender ideology pervasive in society. And often we see also in that connection different forms of conspiracy theories, and also an instrumental use of particularly children's rights or children's interests with the anti-gender movements again and again seeking to portray themselves as the true protectors of children in different settings. And even though we see this transnationalization, we also see a nationalist discourse in many countries where gender ideology, or sometimes also woke culture, political correctness, and so on, are framed as foreign impositions, both from outside of Europe, but also within Europe with regard to the EU, as a foreign imposition on some countries in this kind of nationalist discourse. And all of this helps contributing to these kinds of anti-gender mobilizations that we see regarding to different kinds of thematic areas, as mentioned before, and different kinds of also policies that are often being rolled back in some of the countries. Then let's see if I can show the next slides. Then we've also looked more closely at the types of feminist responses to anti-gender mobilizations, and published this book, as you can see on the left side, specifically focusing on how feminist movements have reacted, but also started, at least in recent years, to become more proactive with regard to countering anti-feminist and anti-gender mobilizations. We see some diversity in terms of the level of engagement, the focus, and also whether a certain feminist movement in a country is more confrontational or non-confrontational. But we see across Europe a movement from being more reactive with regard to the anti-gender movement, at least from the beginning of the 2010s, to becoming more proactive. What we call productive resistance here, which means, for instance, that we see a much more stronger cooperation between national feminist movements today, with the explicit purpose here of countering the anti-gender movement, and also a focus on the structural needs in that regard. To resist anti-gender movements, both with regard to funding, but also activist resources, time, and so on. Yes. And then, Lise.
Yeah, similarly, we also have a deeper analysis of the feminist movements in Europe with this, let's say, twin book on feminist movements in time and space. And what we can see, or what we find, is a kind of, or what we determine as conjuncture of change. We can see a shift in the content and strategy of the feminist mobilization. So of course we see this reaction to anti-gender mobilizations, the productive resistance that Andreas just explained, but we also see some other tendencies and dynamic in terms of how feminist mobilizations and feminist movements are developing in Europe. So first of all, we find that there is an emerging cohesion in some areas, with especially within the area of gender-based violence, where we see more and more in terms of the frames of the movements, and also through our interviews, we can see much more sort of a common understanding of this problem and how we should address it, how we should deal with it, and with a very clear emphasis on the structural understandings of gender-based violence. And in general, this is also what we find, that there is a sort of increasingly complex structural analysis made by the feminist movements, especially, of course, in the way in which they take into account the impact of intersecting inequalities, and how that permeates society and the system as such, and how we need to pay attention to this. We have to address it. We have to look at these intersectional dimensions of both of the movements in themselves, and also, of course, of policy making and political institutions. Another key tendency is the increased importance of alliances and coalition building. It speaks also to the findings on the reactions to anti-gender movements. So how we see feminist movements coming together more and more with other movements, collaborating on shared agendas and concerns, setting up networks, etc. Precisely because there is this sense of urgency. There's a sense of a shared struggle where everybody benefits, let's say, from collaborating within these areas. And then finally, we see a transformation also of the repertoires of contention. So, for instance, we have seen the impact of feminist strikes, especially in Southern Europe, and with the inspiration from Latin America as well, and different forms of, let's say, different forms of actions, different forms of mobilization, so that we see coming to more and more, let's say, into this arena. Of course, this is sort of one part, let's say, of the dynamics, but we also find some of the challenges, let's say, for the feminist movements can be a challenge in itself with this idea of how to practice, let's say, intersectionality within the movements. And in general, we do see different kinds of cleavages, generational conflicts, etc. Also conflicts very specifically related to certain themes like transgender rights, for instance, that also is characteristic, let's say, of the feminist movements in Europe today. And then I think for the last part, we can move into this. I mentioned it a few times that we will tell more about the co-creation and the feminist democratic innovation. So let's do that to finish this.
Yes, yeah, as another core part of the FIRST project, as already mentioned, we've been organizing these co-creative processes, particularly through co-creation labs in each of the 8 countries, but also a transnational lab covering activists, involving activists from all of Europe, and a network resulting from this. And besides these co-creation labs, we've also funded 18 fierce actions, as we've called them, actions organized by feminist activists themselves, but with a focus on addressing intersectionality and democratic innovation. And all of these different kinds of participatory approaches have also thereby connected us as scholars with activists on a more horizontal level, so to speak, resulting in many new different forms of collaboration and networks that will continue after the FIERCE project as well. And here's just an overview of some of the different types of FIERCE actions that we've funded, ranging from public exhibitions to roundtables, to policy briefs, and even board games and so on. Just briefly here at the end, we would like to emphasize at least 3 core aspects of these co-creation labs. First of all, they were action-oriented corporations, which made many of the activists feel that they had a stake and something to gain out of these labs. But there was also, of course, a focus on the process itself and the dialogue, respecting everyone's voices, and also having room for internal disagreements. And in that respect, also, incorporating intersectionality in the labs themselves, building up, small communities through these co-creative processes. And just very briefly at the end, we've already touched upon this, that these kinds of participatory approaches have also been focusing on democratic innovation and have realized, enacted different types of feminist democratic innovation today, showing how democratic innovation today from a feminist perspective can be a form of experimentation with politics, challenging some of the traditional norms for how to be engaged in politics and how to do activism. And this has not been like a sort of a top-down process with us defining from advance what feminist democratic innovation is about. It has more been a bottom-up process with the activists themselves being involved in discussing and realizing what feminist democratic innovation might be in practice. Yes, I think that was it for us, right? Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, both to Lise and Andreas, for your really important and inspiring intervention. I'm really looking forward to discussing deeper about your work later in the discussion. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce our next amazing speakers from the Resist Project today. We have Roberto Culpa, who is Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Social Studies at Edinburgh and Napier University, and Marianne Blidon, who is Associate Professor in Geography and Demography at Pantheon-Sorbonne University in Paris. Together, you represent 2 central consortium partners from the Resist Project, fostering queer, feminist, intersectional resistances against transnational anti-gender politics. And your project explores anti-gender politics that imperil equality, gender, and sexual diversity and legitimacy of critical knowledge in contemporary Europe. And amongst other things, your project looks at how feminist and queer practices of resistance against anti-gender politics, how it manifests, and how they function and are theorized about, both in grassroots collectives and also organizations. A very, very timely and important interdisciplinary project, given the backlash against especially queer and trans rights in recent years. So again, a very warm welcome to both of you as well. We're very eager to hear more about your project. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you to all the Inspire team for invitation. And we're really glad also to have this dialogue with various colleagues and build some synergies across all our projects. Before I head with our short overview of the Resist, let me just mention for our viewers that what are you going to hear and see is indeed very much aligning with what has Piers just presented. Many findings, as you will hear and see, are exactly the same, which is another proof of their kind of salience, and it kind of gives, I believe, more methodological and theoretical robustness to all our projects and general knowledge about anti-gender movements, since we are arriving to the very similar conclusions and findings across different methodologies, projects, groupings, case studies. So I think this is really important. And shows that irrespectively of our national case studies or regional case studies of those two projects, our viewers of this short course, irrespectively of where they are located politically, culturally, geographically, they can find and use and work with those findings because, as I've just said, exactly, it's very clear and transparent that there is more global structure at play here than just the specific case studies that we are talking about. So let me start now with our short presentation. There it is. And hopefully you can see me all and hear me. So we are a Resist, fostering queer feminist intersectional resistances against transnational anti-gender mobilizations. As a Fierce project, we have been funded by the Horizon Europe grant, and we also focus on how anti-gender politics imperil equality, gender and sexual diversity, and legitimacy of critical knowledge in contemporary Europe. We are a consortium of 10 organizations located all across Europe, and we build on the interdisciplinary knowledge of our members coming from political sciences, sociology, gender studies, human geography, cultural studies, demography, philosophy. What is also very important for us in the Resist is to highlight queer feminist ethos of collaborative work, in which we actively engage not only across disciplines, but also across different knowledge producers. Ourselves being located in academic settings, we recognize disparities and also at times lack of recognition of the immense bodies of knowledge and experiences built and found across civil society organizations. So it was important for us to build together, enter in dialogue and build bridges across academia and activism to highlight those existing knowledges, add new ones, and build synergies and bridges across different fields of existing knowledge to counteract those anti-gender mobilizations. A brief overview of our stages. While Fierce, as it has been mentioned, is just about to finish, we have one more year ahead of us. our 4-year project started with the first stage of mapping formations of anti-gender, and I will outline a little bit more findings of this first stage in a moment. In the second year, we have moved to listening on the ground at micro level on the lived personal and professional experiences of the effects of anti-gender mobilizations. Then recently finished stage 3 was all about collaborating to resist anti-gender mobilizations with civil sector organizations, with civil society actors. We are now entering our 4th year, and we are slowly developing and building the stage 4, where we aim to reinvigorate feminist theories and practices by producing a set of different tools. And finally, the stage 5, as you see, sharing and supporting democratic inclusions through a range of impact and dissemination activities. Well, although we put it as a stage, it actually is one of the stages that runs across all our project from the very beginning. So now let me briefly overview and introduce you to the first stage, mapping of anti-gender mobilizations. So at the very beginning, we have asked ourselves, what are the political manifestations of anti-gender mobilizations? How they are formed transnationally? What are intersecting categories of inequality underpinning them? And we looked at specifically at parliamentary and media discourses to build a background, a context for understanding of other elements, which we'll introduce in a moment. So for this specific stage, we had 5 case studies of European Parliament and then parliaments and media in United Kingdom, Hungary, Poland, and Switzerland. We chose these because we felt that they represent very well a range of political spectrum of different cultures, different narratives, different political systems, and through the spectrum, they help us to understand how anti-gender politics manifests itself across different geopolitical locations. This was particularly important for us because, as we learn, much of the focus on anti-gender politics is very often pinned and to Central and Eastern Europe. And there is certain dangerous, in our opinion, understanding in mainstream media and politics that this is a problem of Eastern European countries rather than global problem, rather than problem of Western European countries. So it was very important for us to show that anti-gender manifestations are different, but they are really an issue in every of those different political historical cultures. We looked at the data from 2015, and we have scrutinized around 200 parliamentary debates and over 1,000 media articles to understand how those discourses are building up and what sort of controversies are emerging. One of our findings is about the actors, and here you will hear many of the similarities of what our colleagues in FIRS have mentioned, that those actors are primarily cis men aligned with conservative and radical extreme right. The role of media is very important, and media are actually actively platforming up anti-gender actors. There are also very clear interactions and cross-feeding between political party agendas, media coverage of the different debates, and civil society anti-gender actors. Importantly, we want to highlight that the anti-gender actors and discourses are not only a matter of radical and extreme right. This is another fallacy that is popularly circulating in the mainstream. We also found that the more center-aligned political actors are also actively engaged in contributing to those debates. Therefore, we need to think about anti-gender mobilizations as spanning left-right political divides. And in this, on the right side, you see also what do we mean actually by anti-gender mobilizations, which perhaps is also helpful to outline. When we talk and when we use this anti-gender as a shorthand, we actually means anti-trans politics, anti-sex work, anti-abortion, anti-feminist, anti-immigration politics, anti-LGBTIQ, anti-sex education work, and in some contexts also anti-European discourses. So you'll see and hear an amalgam of very different approaches that come hand in glove together in building this very fluid political phenomenon that we call anti-gender. Now, what sort of tactics have we discovered at this first stage? Well, again, many similarities here with our colleagues. Gender is framed as threat to heteronormative family and sex-based, biology-based roles and identities. Gender equalities are also framed as anti-national, somehow endangering national sovereignty. They are used to deny LGBTQI rights, women's rights, and reproductive rights. And also, we are highlighting the role of and the figure of child that is supposedly endangered by the supposed excesses of gender ideology in the anti-gender discourse, that is greater gender equalities. And paradoxically, what we see in political and media discourse is a twisted narrative where those anti-gender politics of the majoritarian political actors frame their actions as a defense of democracy and defense of majority against feminist and LGBTQI movements. In those twisted narratives, majority is seen as minority under threat, and discriminated minoritized groups and gender equalities are framed as some sort of dominant hegemonic forces trying to impose something on the society. So very particular twisted narrative here. Another set of tactics that we've observed also is focused on trans people's rights. And that's important to highlight because the rise of trans people's rights has become more notable in recent years than it was before. Unfortunately, in those anti-gender political and media discourses, trans identities are presented as ideology and activism rather than lived experience of many people. We see increased marginalization of trans people as a very tactically, systematically organized action. And also here we see those global conspiracy theories that also our colleagues in FEARS have noted in their research, whereby gender and sexual equalities are framed as gender ideology, as nebulous force coming somehow from outside by some obscure, non-representative agencies trying to impose themselves on the national politics and national sovereignties. And to conclude the overview of this first stage, we want to highlight that meanings assigned with gender ideology are adaptable, changing by context and over time. Those mutations are used to advance gender politics. They're very plastic and flexible. And that is one of the hardest elements to address because of that flexibility and adaptability. And that is potentially one of the sources of their, unfortunately, success. And now I will hand over to my colleague Marianne, who will overview the stage 2 of our project. Marianne.
Thank you very much, Roberto. At the second stage of the project, we explored two guiding questions. First, what are the effects of anti-gender mobilization discourses and politics on people's lived experiences? And the second, how do people cope with those effects? These questions matter because anti-gender mobilization are not abstract. They translate into everyday harms. At the same time, focusing on copying strategies allows us to recognize not only victimization, but also the agency of people and communities who are finding the way to resist. We approach these two questions with a qualitative methodology, conducting 104 interviews and 36 focus groups across 9 case studies with Belarus, Ireland, Poland, Spain, Switzerland, France, Germany, and also Greece, and a group of people living in exile. Sorry, for the slide. Yes, thank you, Roberto. Sorry for this. This quote from Magda, a participant in Poland, illustrates these dynamics. She calls anti-gender politic an ideological offensive built on repeated moral panics about supposed threats to society. In her view, the panics divide communities and make them easier to control. What is important here is that people are not only aware of the harm, but also of the broader political project behind it. This perspective reminds us that anti-gender politics function as a tool of governance through polarization. Nevertheless, beyond the political divide, these are narrative and practice that impact individuals in their daily lives and results in tangible harm. Across contexts, participants report tangible social, economic, and psychological harms. Anti-gender politics directly affect feminist and LGBTQ+ people, but they also erode democratic values and human rights more broadly. And I think it's very important to understand this issue. It's not just only the matter of feminist and LGBT people. It's more broader a question of democratic values and human rights. Crucially, this is not limited to Eastern Europe or to the far right. These attacks are part of a wider pattern across Europe. Institutions often fail to act and are even complicit, which exacerbs people's sense of vulnerability. And yet, people and collectives mobilize using solidarity, advocacy, and legal action to defend rights and dignity. This tells us that lived experience are not only about suffering, but also about active resistance. So I will present some effect of anti-gender politics. When we look more closely, the spectrum of effects are striking. On the institutional side, people report discrimination on legislation, restriction on academic freedom, and political extortion. On the personal side, they face hate speech, cyberbullying, intimidation, and even physical attack. Many experience burnout, job loss, family estrangement, and the need to relocate and to migrate in some case. What it shows is that anti-gender politics operate at multiple levels. They undermine public institutions while simultaneously disrupt the most intimate aspect of the people's lives. This multi-layered impact reveals just how powerful these narratives are in shape both politics and daily experiences. Yet, people are not passive. They develop a wide range of coping strategies from withdrawing temporarily to protect themselves, to building communities of solidarity and care. They share resources, engage in advocacy and legal action, and use art or education, for example, to spread knowledge. Practice of joy, friendship, and chosen family are also central, as they allow people to sustain activism in hostile context. What we see here is that copying is not only about survival, but it's also about creating alternative spaces of belonging and imagining more inclusive futures. So I pass the micro to Roberto for the next.
Thank you, Marianne. And now, just very briefly, a couple of words about the freshly completed stage 3, in which we have collaborated with 40 civil society organizations to collaboratively produce knowledge and highlight and platform out the existing knowledge among the civil society groups. We have complemented these collaborations with over 30 interviews with experts across Europe who provided further expert insight into a range of related intersecting underlying problems that make up what we call anti-gender mobilizations. With this stage, we've been following on from the second one, and we have the similar range of case studies. The outcome of the stage is a strategy for a sustainable, cross-sectoral, transnational, and intersectionally informed feminist network to counter anti-gender mobilizations, because we believe very much as our colleagues in FIRS that only by coming together across different disciplines, across different sectors, we can only counter those systematic and organized mobilizations together. And final words about the currently ongoing stage. reinvigorating feminist theories, during which we will be producing policy recommendations, toolkits, and guides to better support policymakers, civil society organizations, media, journalists, opinion makers in countering the disinformation of the anti-gender politics. So that's it from us. Thank you. And back to our group.
Thank you so much, Roberto and Mayan, for your wonderful presentation. I'm really excited to follow along with the last year also of all the work that's been going on in Resist. Yeah, and I would just like to say maybe let's jump right away into our discussion. There's so many questions that I have for both the projects. I've been taking many notes, but I'd like to start with a follow-up question to both of your presentations about your approaches to studying anti-gender campaigns. So if we start with the Fierce project and Lisa and Andreas, so as we've heard, your project is based on the 8 case studies where you study both feminist and anti-feminist activities and discourses, as we've heard a little bit about. Can you speak a little bit more about how you've approached studying both feminist and anti-feminist movements, and how they're manifesting in Europe?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, I would say on a general level here, I think there are a lot of considerations when studying both feminist and anti-feminist movements here. They're both what one could call counter-movement dynamics, where you also see mirroring strategies. They continuously react to each other and sometimes even copy each other in terms of activist strategies and so on. But there are also clear asymmetries. And yeah, perhaps here it's important also to highlight some of the asymmetries, especially with regard to the more practical methodological level, because as a feminist research project approaching especially the anti-gender actors here, anti-feminist actors, they perceive you differently, of course, than the feminist movements do. And it's not a secret that we, as many other researchers, continuously experience difficulties with, for instance, interviewing these actors. It's much more difficult. And this makes it sometimes necessary to find other sources of information, or doing other kinds of ethnography, such as coming to their demonstrations or political meetings. But we have also succeeded, I would highlight still, in interviewing anti-gender actors across most of our country cases. And I think a lot of it also depends on the political culture around Europe. In some cases where there's more also confrontational milieu or political culture, that can be much more difficult than in other settings in other countries. Then if I could highlight just one more asymmetry here, which is more in the discourses and the ideologies present here, I think as a counter movement, and the anti-gender movement and anti-feminism is most often much more conservative, focused on securing the status quo, if not rolling back recent advances in gender equality policies, for instance. And they also operate with more specific enemy constructions, as we could also hear from the presentation from Resist. The anti-gender movement is, in a sense, built on a specific enemy construction, and sometimes also coupled with conspiracy theories. And when you look at the feminist movements, they are usually much more nuanced, aware of complexity, but also focus much more not on individual actors who they oppose, but on a more structural level. And this is also something to keep in mind, also because we are, in a sense, part of the enemy construction from the anti-gender movement. Yes.
Yeah, maybe I can just add very briefly to this, precisely about being part of the enemy construction. I think it's also something that from the beginning you have to take into account when how you approach this. Of course, we knew, as Andreas said, that it would be more difficult to get interviews with anti-gender and anti-feminist actors, and we also reflected that in the setup, that we aim for less, let's say, for these reasons. But I think also from the beginning we've had a lot of discussions and concerns in terms of let's say that the security in a broad sense of doing this kind of data collection, this kind of field work, and I think of course it goes for researchers again as being part of this enemy construction, but it also definitely was a concern in terms of the activists and the movements that we collaborated with. I think, Roberto, you mentioned this about how anti-gender sometimes is also anti-European. So this combination of a feminist focused project funded by the European Union, of course, that also is a mix that can also, let's say, put some of the activists that we collaborated with as a target. And this, I think, the range of issues here is very broad. Of course, I mean, when we say security, of course, that can sound like something very like a direct threat, which can also sometimes be the case. But it can also be this issue of how you are then addressed in media or whatever might happen as a consequence of being part of this kind of research. So this is also something that's necessary to take into account and have measures ready, let's say, to address this.
Thank you so much, both Lisa and Andreas. I think it's really interesting, this enemy construction and kind of also the collapsing of complexity that's also going on in the anti-gender movements, right? In exactly making this enemy construction. And if we turn over to Roberto and Mayen, in the first parts of the Resist project, as you've highlighted in your presentation, Roberto, was on your part on the 5 case studies that you've had focusing on the UK and Poland and Switzerland and Hungary and the EU Parliament as examples of parliamentary and media discourse. Can you speak a little bit more about your approach to controversy mapping, if we're staying a little bit in our methodological train of thought? And so can you speak a little bit about the controversy mapping and overall studying these hypercharged moments in recent history?
Yes, it is actually, as you see, for the first stage, our set of examples was and case studies was slightly different than in the later stages, precisely because of the certain methodological challenges that already Lisa and Andreas mentioned. And also because in our project design, we consciously didn't want to focus on anti-gender actors too much. And we've decided from the very beginning to give more space and thinking on finding out about the effects of those politics in everyday lives of different affected people and communities. That's why there is the kind of a smaller case study sample here and chosen for the more exemplary rather than actual in-depth examination. We did a sort of 3-stage methodological cross-checks. So we have started with a form of content analysis and thematic analysis of the parliamentary debates. In each of the cases, we have draw a certain all the actors that we identified who are perpetuating and engaging in the debates. We have identified a set of thematic codes or themes more broadly that are used, discursive strategies that are deployed around the issues that come together as the anti-gender here. Then we have opened it up for work and scrutiny of media discourses, and we have continued with the content analysis of selected a number of titles. In our countries, we have looked at the mainstream, more liberal and conservative daily newspapers. We have looked at some tabloids and also some cases of the right, far-right media. Examples in some cases also on social media. I'm like all the details. I will not be getting into it here. All our interested viewers can read all this in our reports, which every step is very kind of described in details. And then the controversy mapping that you've highlighted, and I think this is especially interesting approach that helped us really to pull everything together. We have chosen a specific event, a case, a controversy that happened in our chosen time as a sort of the micro universe of what happened, how happened, who was engaged, what was used, to see how in practice those identified actors, tactics, thematic strategies, discursive and other resources, how they all come to play together. So we did a little bit of content tracing, actors tracing. We looked at a different set of newspapers, their websites. When there were different institutions mentioned, we went to the institutions and follow through in this kind of snowballing a tracing of the connections to really see how the resources, the tactics feed across different actors and how they are all come together and manifest themselves together. And this final stage of controversy mapping has been particularly rewarding because, as I've mentioned, it really helps to see at play everything coming together in a nutshell in this micro universe of one chosen case. Yes.
Thank you, Roberto. So if we turn our attention to the latest developments, understandings, and consequences of anti-gender movements in Europe, and if we start again with you, Lisa and Andreas, so which new developments in anti-gender mobilization around Europe in recent years have the FIERCE project uncovered, and how strong is the anti-gender movement today?
Yeah, once again, I think our findings here confirm each other because the Resist project has already, confirmed some of our results here about the anti-trans campaigns being particularly prominent as a clear development in the anti-gender mobilizations in the recent 5 to 10 years. And I think there are several reasons for anti-trans campaigns becoming so prominent. One, at least explanation here, is that trans persons as a sexual or gender minority here is still not offered the same kind of recognition and rights as other sexual minorities, particularly homosexuals and bisexuals. So in that sense, they're an easier target. There are not so many repercussions from mainstream politicians, for instance. And then anti-trans campaigns are also a clear and easy way of advancing an essentialist discourse about gender. What some would just call biological essentialism. And this also helps to create new alliances between, for instance, the far right and religious forces, and then actually some feminist and LGBT groups, activist groups of homosexuals and bisexuals in some countries. And these are sometimes in the literature described as strange bedfellows, because they don't really share that much else besides this kind of essentialist discourse about gender. But this still makes it possible for them to cooperate in making anti-trans campaigns, which are in some countries at least quite successful these years. And then you also asked about the strength of the anti-gender movement in general. I think this is a very difficult question. I don't have the final answer, and it also depends on perspective, I guess. But I think these anti-trans campaigns at least testifies to the flexibility of the anti-gender movement and the continued strength that it can move into new territories while still maintaining some of the classical campaigns, so to speak, about against, for instance, sexual education, same-sex marriage, reproductive rights, and so on, which we see in many countries. And then finally, I think it's important here, even though it hasn't been part of our project to look into this, but to highlight that there are still money flows, financial resources coming in into Europe from both Russia, the US, and other parts of the world, which behind the scene probably plays a major role here in fueling these kinds of campaigns. Yeah. Lisa, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think you covered it, and you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of also future research, this idea of follow the money, right? And then I think also as the resist what you presented and our findings as well, this transnational dimension is really important, and it shows precisely the strength, right, of the anti-gender movement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So for Marianne and Roberto, so in the second stage of your project, you have also focused on, as you mentioned, creating new understandings of the effects of anti-gender politics on everyday lives, and also on forms of resistance in the 10 countries you mentioned. So what are some of the ways you have found anti-gender campaigns to be affecting people's everyday lives? And what are some of the consequences for people, especially minorities?
Maybe I will start. I think it's a very important point. Maybe it's echo to the first question. Our findings confirms that it's not just a question of ideological division or opposition between pro and anti-gender side. I think it's a kind of trap to present this issue like that, because it gives the impression that we are on the same level of fundings, and it's like a gentle battle. But in fact, looking the effects, so show us that it's a question of violation of law For example, harassment, bullying, physical violence. It's not just a question of opinion, freedom of speech. It's a question of tactic, discourses that harms people and community, and it's a very huge problem, and it's also a question of human rights. And I think it's very important to maybe delocate this question. It's not just a question of feminist issue or LGBTQ plus community, but it's fundamentally a question of democracy and values. And I think regarding the consequences and effect on people, and to name this situation like a violation of law, it's very important, because it's not just a question of ideology, discourses, opposition, gentle battle of ideas and debate. No, it's not the case. It's a question of physical violence, cyberbullying. It's maybe we need to choose what kind of values we want to defend in Europe. It's a large topic for all of us. Maybe Roberto, you want to add something?
Yes, I think you are absolutely right, and this needs to be stressed that this is not a level playing field. And exactly as you have said, Marianne, we must not allow ourselves to think that the pro-gender equality positions and the anti-gender mobilizations are two sides equally positioned on the in the discussions. It absolutely is not. You are very right in highlighting the very concrete physical, embodied, psychological, health-related forms of violence that is happening among the anti-gender mobilizations, and also excursions and attempts at broader redefining of also social and political and educational institutions. This is also one of the elements that we have found, and which was important to highlight. In the debates, for example, we also our colleagues from fears that sex education is one of the issues often brought up by the anti-gender campaigns. But it's not only sex education and the content of sex education, but the very notion of what is education, what is a proper, acceptable, and legitimate knowledge that is at play. The anti-gender mobilizations build a sort of alternative institutions, knowledge institutions, alternative think tanks, universities. They bring pseudo experts that try to present themselves as scientific and use that scientific legitimacy to strengthen their arguments, whereas they are not. It needs to be very clearly kind of said. So there is something much sinister happening at the very kind of structural level. So absolutely, Marianne, you are spot on in saying that this is not an equal level playing field in terms of the strategies, and also in terms of the counteractions. As you've Liv asked, the counteractions of the feminist and LGBT and other groups who care about liberties and democratic freedoms are not in the same position as those anti-gender actors. Lisa, you've mentioned the funding. It's absolutely crucial to understand and know that anti-gender campaigns are heavily funded by major, very wealthy American donors, Russian donors, and other organizations across the world. although also in the resist, we have not looked in this specifically, but there are other research that shows this, and I especially want to highlight here the work of the Parliamentary Intergroup for Gender and Sexuality, led by Nick Data, who have recently produced a revised report precisely on the economic and money chasing elements of anti-gender campaigns. That work is very important because it highlights this hidden infrastructure that underpins all those actions that we see that manifests in the media discourse, in the political debates, etc. So that metaphor of an iceberg, I think, is important here and might be helpful for us in thinking about the structure of anti-gender mobilizations. Right, the tip of an iceberg is only what we see. These are those most visible actors, institutions, tactics, but the majority of that infrastructure that allows this to come to knowledge is really hidden behind the doors, and that's what we across different stages in the resist try to do, kind of build a little bit more this. That's what our colleagues in other projects have been doing and other researchers are doing, which is very important, but we are not in the same part. Here we don't have the same resources as those anti-gender organizations, even though in their perspective and in their claims, false, I still insist, it's the other way around, that, as I've mentioned, that twisted narrative where they present themselves as somehow in danger, impoverished, attacked, the stuff against those supporting gender equality. Is that, but that's not the truth, and we need to be very, very clear here.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think these are some really important points about how it's not a level playing field, both in terms of power and funding, money, follow the money, but also like all of you have just been talking about this, how the pro-gender equality and anti-gender campaigns aren't two sides of the same coin, even though the anti-gender campaigns is exactly trying to position themselves as we are equal. But I really like the metaphor of the tip of the iceberg, Roberto, with, of all of the structures and the funding and the things that can't be seen in this positioning, right? Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. As I'm just also thinking about, all of you have also talked about that in your projects that you've worked so intentionally with feminist activism and feminist resistance and collaboration and strategies against anti-gender politics that we've talked a little bit about. But I'm just wondering, if we're thinking about the ways that you've worked with resist, if we start with you, that you've worked with the queer feminist collectives and organizations on a more collective, collaborative level, can you speak a little bit more about the kinds of resistance strategies and insights that you found that have been important to countering the iceberg on the other side of the anti-gender politics?
So maybe I'll start now, and then Marianne, please come and say more. Yes. So as we've mentioned, it's really important for us as a project to work with civil society organizations because we believe that knowledge is not only a domain of academia, of academic institutional research, but there is a wealth of knowledge existing and constantly produced, updated by the civil society. And it was very important for us to recognize this as a very valuable a field with which we want to work, and to create a space where we can enter a dialogue between those different sectors of civil society and academia, and also build a platform on which we can support and showcase that knowledge. Because one of the challenges across research into gender and sexuality, anti-gender movements, and other topics is that in the contemporary society and under the neoliberal conditions, different sectors, different institutions are very often siloed into separate, distinct sectors, and we are pressed to work on our own, to produce, to deliver, and there is very little space given to build synergies. To come together and to really reflect on what's already is there and kind of bring this to shining. So there's a lot of attention on the constant delivery of outputs, of new elements, of new trainings, of different forms of outputs. But there is very little utilization of the existing knowledges. So we wanted to overcome this by coming in dialogue with civil society organizations and opening a space where also we can learn as academics from those informal in the sense of non-academic bodies of knowledge and know-how that exist there, that are, as we have said, very often much more attuned to the given specific local contexts and are much more up to date. Because, as you know, the anti-gender mobilizations are a fast-moving terrain, and there are periods when there is a lot of happening, and it is the civil society and people engaged in activism that are really responding at the forefront. By the very nature of the research and academic research, we are much slower, so we are perhaps better in seeing the kind of the broader trends that are happening in this bird's eye view, so to say. But at times it's harder for us in academia to see the details happening on the ground from the micro perspectives. And that is where the civil society comes and have this insight. So I think by the merging two of the academic and civil society, we are able to bridge and come together those macro level perspectives and more micro level, and build a longer term, broader historical patterns of forms of mobilizations on both sides of anti-gender movements and also of the resistances, queer feminist resistances. But also then we are able to show how they are changing, how they are reactive. And also by coming together with organizations, we are ensuring that we are paying due credit to different cultural, social, political differences. And this is really, really important, because while much of what we are talking about here is shared and can be found across different contexts, there are still a very important differences, and we need to work with them, and we need to be mindful, and we need to highlight them to make the strategies of resisting more attuned and more effective. Marianne, would you like to add?
I'm not sure I have something to add. Maybe an important point is expertise and background of the people we work with, because sometimes they have a strong experiences of the fighting, not just on anti-gender issue, but also on racism, ecological issue. So they sometimes have a very long experiences of this kind of situation. So I think the intergenerational dialogue is also very powerful, because sometimes, people say, oh, when when I was young, we fight the same difficulties. For example, for the right to abortion, they face also not bullying on internet, because it was not the context, but they also fight harassment and some strategies. So I think to engage this kind of dialogue, it's also very powerful. We also accumulate that kind of knowledge. So I think it's very important and interesting in this project.
Thank you so much to both of you. Yeah, I think that these the insights about temporality and insights depending on positionality, whether this be generational, or Roberto, when you were talking about with the academia and civil society, and what we can learn from intergenerational, what we can learn between academia and civil society, being so important for feminist pathways forward. And so if we're gonna turn to feminist pathways, in relation to the anti-gender movement that you all have looked at as well, Lisa and Andreas, what kind of feminist pathways and strategies for campaigning in these times of backlash have you been looking at within your project? Can you spoke a little bit about it in your presentation, but I was hoping that you could elaborate a little bit more on pathways, feminist pathways and strategies.
Sure. Yeah, because this was part of our also the initial mapping that we did in the project, and as Andreas mentioned in the presentation, we have worked with this idea, right, of the reactive responses and proactive responses. So this idea of productive resistance as a way in which we can see that feminist movements are kind of moving beyond, let's say, not just responding to what is happening, but also let's say moving forward, right, and proposing and enacting new ways of mobilization within this context. And so in that book that we mentioned, of course, we have this idea of productive resistance, but also a typology of different responses to anti-gender politics, right, by the feminist movements. So we have a whole range of these types, but I can just mention a few of them. So, for instance, we have looked at the ways in which feminist movements sort of now, let's say, use direct action and public demonstrations. And as you said, Marianne, some of these things, of course, I mean, they have a long history, right? So it's not to say that we're like seeing a whole reinvention of forms of action in that sense, but we do see some interesting tendencies, let's say, or ways of expressing this. So, for instance, there is this idea of sort of reclaiming the public space, but also very clearly a use of emotions that we found particularly interesting in some of the cases that we studied. So we talked about politicized affectivity that kind of comes across in different ways. So, for instance, in the Greek case, we have seen some examples of collective mourning in public spaces when there have been attacks, murders also on LGBTQI plus activists. So using this as a way of collective resistance to, I mean, using the emotion of course, of sorrow and mourning in the public space. And let's say, sort of on the contrary, almost, the Spanish domestic care workers movement very much used sort of joy and dance and music as part of their mobilization strategies. So it's still a politicized, let's say, use of the emotions as a strategy within this work, but from two, of course, very different perspectives in those cases. But this is one of sort of the types of responses that we see. Then I think we've mentioned a few times, all of us almost, I think this the importance of the alliances. And this is one of the fierce actions that we funded from Slovenia, dealt precisely with that. So it was a digital platform between feminist actors and LGBTQI plus actors, where they try to sort of have, of course, a space first of all for exchanging, supporting each other, etc., but also very clearly sort of this idea of sharing resources and strategies on how to counteract anti-gender tendencies, misinformation, how to respond if there are attacks, etc. So we kind of see this convergence of the digital forms of activism with this idea of alliance building as well, as another type. And then maybe just the last one to mention, which I think is again very similar to resist. So you had these coping strategies, right? And how the idea of sort of community building and the approach to sort of self-care is very important, and we can see that at a collective level as well for the feminist movements. So it's very important within sort of these, again, types of responses to have a focus on that as well, how important it is to have these safe spaces within the movements, and to focus on this issue of self-care and collective care, because these effects are, as you mentioned also, Marianne and Roberto, are very serious effects, right, on your well-being, on your health, and these things. So it's very important to notice this also as a type of a response to what is happening, creating these communities where, again, you can share, you can have peer-to-peer support, but also assistance in terms of reporting cases, discrimination, all these different needed resources, right, that you have within the communities, and being able to support each other in that way is also important. And then maybe just as a final note, or maybe unless you have more to add to it, but one thing, and I think we saw this in some cases as well, that some of the movements also opt for this, I think we called it strategic non-engagement. So opting for not entering into a dialogue, for instance, or not having confrontations with anti-gender actors, but sort of refraining from that, not using, let's say, the energy on these kinds of interactions, and sometimes also very strategically, let's say, trying to sort of plant this feminist knowledge, feminist expertise in different places, but without labeling it this way, right? So trying to sort of, we called it camouflage, to try to sort of get this feminist knowledge production disseminated, but without being very explicit about it, right? So that's also part of this sort of non-engagement strategies for some of the movements. Yeah.
Yeah, and I could perhaps add here that for many feminist activists, it's also an ambivalent non-engagement, because of course it comes with certain costs, often not to engage oneself in certain issues, or with certain actors, not wanting to debate with them. But often, yeah, there are strategic calculations even, or at least considerations behind, that are worth, being aware of when analyzing and discussing these issues, because, yeah, as Marianne and Roberto, you point out, there are real harms here by the anti-gender mobilizations. And if I may add just one more thing, I think much of what Lise here touched upon can also be characterized as democratic innovations. That, for instance, these ways of mobilizing affectivity, emotions in one's activism is also a way of being democratically innovative, especially in settings where emotions are often almost suppressed, or at least not acknowledged to the same extent as so-called rational argumentation in public spheres. And I think in that relation, the co-creation labs that we organize, but also many other kinds of what we call mini publics or counter publics, function also as ways for feminist activists to provide safe spaces, yes, for the organization of their work, but also figuring out how they can become engaged in the public, but with clear strategies and minds and real impact. And for instance, many of these co-creation labs were, of course, in a sense, secluded. There were closed settings for political mobilization, but the purpose of them was, of course, to develop different kinds of feminist actions that were then directed toward broader publics. So again, the idea of then being organized in these counter publics or mini publics are not to seclude oneself, but to reorganize and support each other in changing society and engaging in broader publics as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you, Andreas and Lisa. I think it's some really interesting considerations around this like politicized effectivity, all the strategies that go into engaging or non-engaging with especially maybe like political actors that are linked to anti-gender campaigns. And so if we kind of keep in that direction and kind of keep with the feminist activism to resistance in politics today, and we turn attention to both kind of the camouflaged, as you were talking about, Lise, the camouflaged kinds of engagement, but also more blatant resistance in politics. I just wanted to pick up what you were talking about, Andreas, about the democratic innovations. Can you maybe expand a little bit about what how you guys have conceptualized and understood democratic innovations, what they are more concretely, and especially about how they might link to this revitalization of feminist activism in politics today. This could be maybe inside the political systems and maybe also outside in activist work. Your choice.
Yes, so feminist democratic innovations are not isolated actions. They are more continuous way of experimenting with how democracy may look like and expand from a feminist point of view. And this often draws on feminist critiques of especially Western political culture and public spheres as being male dominated, but also organized according to norms that are usually associated with masculinity in some form or another. And in our work, we've analyzed our empirical findings with this in mind and developed a typology also of at least 5 major types of feminist democratic innovations. One of them, for instance, being this organization of feminist counter publics, but also feminist knowledge production, as we touched upon before. And then there's one of the types that I think here is also relevant to highlight, which has not been touched upon that much earlier in the talk, which we have called hybrid activism. So hybrid activism is the idea of experimenting with mixing or going in between established ways of doing politics or traditional ways of doing activism as well. So one of them is, for instance, the idea that you can either be inside or outside political institutions, either be almost fully cooperative with the political institutions or standing at a sort of a radical distance. And here we see many feminist movements going in between, mixing mixing, for instance, political lobbyism with radical protests and a radical critique of the political system. And we also see regarding emotions here, many feminist movements combining or mixing so-called rational argumentation, for instance, legal or scientific discourses, together with emotional discourses or affectivity. And this is also another way of refusing to align with like the existing norms, traditional ways of doing politics and exploring new possibilities. Yeah. I hope this sort of answers your question.
Oh, that's brilliant,
Yeah.
Andreas. Thank you. I
Okay.
don't know if you have anything to add, Lisa. Otherwise, I'll turn over to Resist.
Yeah, I think maybe we just one thing, because we distinguish kind of between policy-oriented democratic innovation and democratic innovation as kind of social movements experimentation as well. So again, what goes on inside the social movements as democratically innovative in itself, or potentially innovative in itself. And I think just within that, especially the last part, it's important also to think of this kind of intersectional solidarity as a kind of democratic innovation as well. But taking that, I think you mentioned before, Molly, this idea of staying with the trouble, right? So being able also within the movement to face the uncomfortable issues as well, and sometimes, I mean, like pushing and challenging all the time in terms of what is actually the characteristics, the quality of what we're doing in terms of intersectional concerns. So I think that's very important as well in some of the examples that we saw, how the movements are really working with this, right? And a lot of sort of the innovative aspects of what they're doing comes from this idea of intersectional concerns. So that is sort of also part of the things that we studied.
Thanks so much for that as well, Lisa. A really important point. And I think if we turn over to Resist, I'm wondering, kind of picking up on the important points that Andreas and Lisa are making also about the intersectional solidarity, ways of organizing, ways of breaking down these ideas of, in or out of political arenas. I'm wondering if you guys could speak more about the role that something like your transnational intersectional queer feminist network that Resist has been building. What role do you all see that of also taking or having in strengthening democracy in Europe?
Okay. Yes, I'm like that's actually the what you've Lisa pointed. I think it's a great kind of a starting point to think about not only what anti-gender mobilizations are, but also how to resist and counteract them. Intersectionality is a keyword, and that is one of the underpinning methodological approaches for the resist and for colleagues. It is one of the underpinning also lived principle, not only methodological approach to research, but also lived experience of navigating those waters for us as a consortium of researchers, but also for civil society organizations with which we worked, and for everyone else who is directly addressed and affected by anti-gender mobilizations. We have mentioned that one of the elements that enables anti-gender mobilizations to be so effective is their flexibility, plasticity, mobility in what it is that they're referring to, in framing the specific, the objects, the evil objects, characters of attack, of framings, and that navigating different political and historical moments as well. So for our participants, both during the interviews, focus groups, as much as organizations during the third stage, this lived experience of intersectionality and responsiveness to this was a clearly pronounced element. We are all occupying and living by a set of different identities, different positions in everyday lives. We are all vulnerable. However, some of us are more vulnerable than others because of exactly particular life positions. And it was very coming across in our research, for example, in the case study of people living in exile in Europe because of the prosecuting practices in their countries from which they had to leave because of their pro-gender equalities, pro-sexual equalities, pro-democratic fight. It comes across very strongly pronounced, but also in all other cases, that people living with multiply marginalized people are exposed not only to those anti-gender attacks, but also need to struggle with lack of recognition of the needs of intersectionally positioned people in everyday lives, and also, unfortunately, with some practices of exclusion or forgetting within feminist and queer groups, because as any other social group, also these groups are not uniform, are not coherent, and are not universal. We must not allow ourselves to think that all people who identify as feminist are one coherent group. There are also various perspectives and practices within. And unfortunately, we see this especially in the case of trans people's rights, how these lead to some internal divisions, and however hurtful they are to everyone who has equalities at heart, observing these. We need to acknowledge them. But we also need to remember that those divisions are exactly one of those effects that anti-gender mobilizations strive to produce. As the quote at the very beginning in our presentation, Marianne, you've read it from one of our participants, kind of showed. Divide and conquer is one of those anti-gender tactics, inciting tensions and conflicts within and between different groups is one of the things that they're trying to do. So we must come together to resist this, but we must come together not as this presumably one unified group, this is impossible, but being mindful of those intersectional positions and also intersectorial positions. All what I've said about working together between civil society, academia, but also with journalists and opinion makers, with educators, with teachers, with policymakers, with public administration, across different groups and contexts is incredibly important. Marianne.
Maybe I just add the question of resources, because we present the balance between people who are focused on self-protection, care, that kind of dimension to create bubble, to protect themselves, and people who fight back in a more radical but legal way. And I think it's important to understand it's not possible for everyone. It's also a question of resources, of network, of capacity to build solidarity, and also family situation. In some case, you know, when you have kids, people give your personal address, the school of your kids. It's also very difficult to fight back and to be very visible in this kind of arena. So I think it's very important to say everyone has his own resources, possibilities, and it's not a problem, because you have not the people who are weak and others that are strong, but everyone do what he could regarding his own position, the situation in his local context and communities. And it's not a problem. It's all those kind of strategy who give us the possibility to move to fight back. So I think it's very important to say, okay, for some people, it's possible to intensify the fight back, to have very radical responses, to be very visible on the on the social media and on the public space, but it's not possible for everyone. And it's all the collection of this kind of strategy will create a common a common movement.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those really important contributions, and also for the important reminder about the importance of a very explicit commitment to intersectionality. It kind of reminds me of that important feminist contribution or saying by Flavia Dozan, the one about my feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. So yeah, just something to remind me of. Anyway, I think we're out of time for today. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Lisa, Andreas, Roberto, and Mayan, for being with Liu and myself today. And thank you for sharing the really important work being done both in the Fierce and Resist projects. For our viewers, please visit the in-depth chapters in this open training unit on the Fierce and Resist projects, where you can read more about the important research and insights coming out of the two projects. I know I look forward to following the rest of the publications and work coming out of Fierce after its closing today. And likewise, to following along in the work being done in the final year of the Resist project. Thank you, everyone, again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Molly
Thank you.
and Lee.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you
Goodbye.
for all.
And thank you for the viewers as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Goodbye.
You
Yeah.
too.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.